Welcome to this week in the high stakes thread on 2+2. It is the third week of September 26th right now. And what we're going to do today is I just picked out a couple of what I thought were kind of interesting hands from the high stakes thread on 2+2, and we're just going to go through them one by one and just chit chat about them, what the goings on are. So our first hand is between Koon, 1985, your boy Jason Koon, high stakes MTT player, plays live and online MTTs, and Zarubina NT. So I actually don't know who Zarubina is. I'm just going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say he is a 6 max reg. Let's just go with that premise. So Koon opens the cutoff, 2.4, gets 3 bits, 7.5 on the button, calls. And then the board is 96224. And Zaru, that's 3/4 on the flop, 3/4 on the turn, and then jams river for what is effectively half pot. And Koon calls with ace queen. This might not look like a good play on the surface, but there are some merits to his play here. So ignoring what Zaru had, because he ends up having a value bet, but that's not really interesting for this discussion. What's really interesting is Koon's call ace queen. So the call ace queen is interesting because Zaru's not going to have a hand like pocket sevens, like 10-9 to value bet in this way. Like, chances are those hands either don't reverse pre-flop or wouldn't play this aggressively post-flop. So the hands that Koon are going to lose to are going to be 10s if he 3-bets pre-flop, which he probably does, so we'll say 10s, through aces. So he loses to 10s through aces, but it's again possible that Zaru checks, maybe flats aces pre-flop, or even checks them on the flop. And if I look at is there any suited connectors that he could have? Not really, because the suited connector, I don't think he would 3-bet 9-6 suited, 5-3 suited, 4-2 suited, 9-2 suited, 6-2 suited, 6s, 9s. I don't really. So in other words, I only think his really only value bet here is going to be a hand like we said, 10s through aces. And the thing about pocket pairs is that, let's just take a pocket pair like pocket jacks, for instance. There's 6 combos of pocket jacks pre-flop. So from 10s to aces, there's 30. Here's the thing though, Koon has an ace and a queen in his hand. If one of the cards is removed, you can only have 3 combos of the pocket pairs. So if his value range is, let's say it's just 10s through aces all the time, he can only have up to 24 combos of value bets. That said, on the river, and so we'll focus specifically on the river. The flop and the turn are kind of complicated, but specifically on the river, Koon is getting 4-1. It's basically 5K to win 20K. So it's not that unreasonable. It's not that difficult to presume that Zaru could have showed up with a hand like ace king, ace 3 suited, ace 5 suited, jack 10, 8-7, 10-8 suited, something like that. He doesn't need to do that often to make this a potentially profitable call. Whether or not that is in practice is really hard to say. It really is sort of like a dependent thing. But to look at this a hero call and think that it's just like a really spewy call or that LOL MTT donks is not necessarily the case. This could actually be a winning call versus his entire range, even if you expect to lose a lot. Because remember, you're getting 3-1. You're supposed to lose a lot, but that's okay. You only have to win a little bit to make money with this call. All right, on to the second hand here. Secret Mode, who I know is a 6 max reg, and a winning player, raises on the button to 1.5x, and Calcilius calls in the big blind. I'm not sure who Calcilius is, so let's just, but I'm familiar with the other players at the table, so let's just say that Calcilius is the spot. He may or may not be. The flop is 9-8-5 rainbow, and Secret Mode goes with a basically half pot bet size on the flop. I think it's fine. Don't know. Again, I'm not looking at his hand yet, but I don't know what he has, but I think there's nothing wrong with that. On the turn, as a king, he bets 1.5 times the size of the pot. And I also have no problem with this. I think that, you can utilize a lot of different bet strategies, bet sizing strategies, and I think 1.5 on the flop, half on the turn, and then 1.5 on the flop on a board like this could definitely make sense with, certain hands. There's some hands it doesn't make sense with. For example, an 8. This would be a really bad bet with an 8, or a 5 for that matter. But with, a more polarized range, I think this is potentially a very reasonable bet. So the river's a 7, and he goes for a small overbet. He bets 28 into 25. Let's just say 24. So basically, we'll just say it's a pot-sized bet, and this also is potentially a fine play. If you think about the hands that Calcilius is calling with, he probably doesn't ever prove to the king unless he improved to 2-pair on the turn. He could have a straight with 6-7, but that's again unlikely. And as we'll see in a moment, Secret has a 7 in his hand, so it's very unlikely. And could have had a straight, but might have check raised the flop. Same thing with 2-pair or a set. What Calcilius will oftentimes have is a 9 or a 5 of the flush draw, like Ace-5 of clubs or 5-4 of clubs, and maybe a couple 8s for 2 pairs. But really, it's just like a ton of 9x hands. So like a bet, like will this bet? Let's say again he bet pot, which a bet like that would need to have work half the time. Would this bet be profitable? And the answer is probably. If we look at like what they actually have, so secret mode has Jack 7. So river's a 7, which is not honestly. I mean, it's almost like potentially a good bluff hand, because the hands that secret mode might be calling with their hands, like 8-7, 9-7, 5-7 of clubs, that makes 2-pair on the river, and he makes it a little bit less likely he has a hand like that, and a little bit more likely he has a hand like, a dry 9, or maybe even an 8 that decided to hero call the turn versus the big bet. So, and then again, like, so the hands, what are the straights that he really has here? It's like, well, maybe 8-6 suited. I don't think he has 8-6 off. Maybe 9-6 suited. Same thing with 9-6 or 5-6 suited. Or a hand like Ace-6 of clubs, 10-6 of clubs. But again, those hands, like, because they have to be suited, are a little bit less likely. And remember, he only has to fold this situation half the time. I would imagine that, around half of his range, if not a little bit more than half his range, is going to be 1-pair on this river. So I think this bet is probably profitable, and he just happened to run into a 6. So honestly, like, pretty well played by both players here. I like the way both players played this hand. Nothing wrong with this. All right, hand number 3. So we got your boy, the king of 6-max, OTB, raises it up to, looks like about 2.3-ish on the button. And Hecklin calls the big line. Hecklin and OTB are definitely regs. Calcilius, another one of these hands, it's a 4-handed table. Makes me think he's probably a reg too. So the flop is 6-4-4 with 2 hearts. And OTB goes for a really small flop bet. And I think that's fine. I think there's a lot of different strategies to employ on a paired board. And I think betting a lot of hands for a small bet size is potentially fine play. Anyway, 6-4-4 with a flush draw. He bets small and gets check raised by Hecklin. And he calls. The turn's a 10. Doesn't really improve much of anything other than a hand like Ace-10 from OTB, or 10x of hearts from OTB, or a hand like 10-7 or 10, like maybe 10-9 of hearts or something like that from Hecklin, maybe even like 10-5 of hearts, something like that from Hecklin. So mostly a brick. So the turn's a brick. Hecklin bets 2/3 pot or 3/4 pot and gets called by Baron. River's a 7, at which point like 5-3 gets there. And 9-8, 8-5 get there, although highly unlikely that Hecklin could easily have 9-8 or 8-5. Baron doesn't really have those hands. He would probably, unless he has 9-8 of hearts, 8-5 of hearts, they would just fold the flop, or 8-5 would definitely fold the turn. So not a ton of hands get there, like maybe a hand like 7s. I would assume OTB would have 7s gets there. What doesn't get there is a hand like Ace-Jack, Ace-9, or a flush draw. And Hecklin checks. And then OTB bets pretty big. Let's see. We got 17 into 21. Bust out our handy dandy calculator. 17 into 21 is 80% pot, so a very big bet. And Hecklin calls. And Hecklin has 9-4 offsuit, and Baron has a king-high flush draw that missed. So let's talk about this hand. So I think pre-flop from Hecklin is fine. There's an ante, so he's going to be calling effectively. Let's just call it $65 to win a total pot of about $293. So only he's 22% equity. So he's getting a great price pre-flop. So playing a hand as weak as 9-4 is not unreasonable. On the flop, OTB goes for a small bet with a flush draw on a paired board in position as a pre-flop raiser. Completely fine with that. And Necklin goes for a check raise. It picks a small check raise size. I like with trips, and I like that too. I think that you don't want to always check raise a 4, but check raising some 4s is good. The turn's a 10, Hecklin bets and Baron calls. And then the river's a 7, and Hecklin checks. I think what Hecklin is thinking is that on this river 7, it looks like if I had a hand like 7-5, 8-7, you know, like 10-8, whatever, maybe pocket 5s or a 6, it looks like I'm probably going to check and try to just like go check, check, and win versus like a high card hand or a worse pair. And from Baron's perspective, it seems like that's pretty reasonable. Like Hecklin might have nothing to be giving up, or might have caught like a piece of this board in some way, or have some showdown value to be checking down. So Baron goes for a really big river bet. He bets 80% of the pot, and Hecklin goes for the check call. So the problem with this bet, or rather with this check from Hecklin, with trips, is that you risk. Let's say that Baron has a hand like jacks, you risk him checking back here. But I think given the run out of this board and how likely that he think Hecklin will have trips in his range, I think that Baron will mostly perceive Hecklin to have a to have like a sort of middle pair at best, or I've often made a middle pair, and so value betting a hand like jacks here would be quite reasonable, especially given that he could certainly have a big hand. He's not really too worried about being check raised or check called by a better hand. So he'll still get all the value from hands like jacks that might call a big river bet, while also catching some bluffs. Like if, for instance, Hecklin bet this river, OTB would just fold king 3 of hearts. As played, OTB, he gets the value from the very good hands and the bluffs as well. So all in all, pretty good line from him. I like it. All right, this next one, some gangster shit happened, and there's been a little rambling as to what exactly happened in this river. So let's get into it. Hand number 4. So Probus raises from middle position to $140 and gets 4 calls. OTB in the cutoff, Iceman in the small blind, takes up the big blind. King, King, 9, rainbow on the flop, and it checks through. Turns an ace, and take chip leads out of the big blind. Now, the very nature of this board tends to favor people that aren't in the big blind. Tends to favor pre-flop raisers, especially the ace on the turn. I mean, many players, especially the pre-flop raisers, the pre-flop players are oftentimes going to raise a lot of aces and check them on the flop. So take chip is showing an inordinate amount of strength by betting this turn. In essence, what he's saying is, I have a king or better betting into this many people. I have a king or better, or I have a bluff, or at least I hope that's what he's doing. Betting almost anything else here, betting anything other than a range of a king, or like maybe a straight draw, or maybe just like a flush draw, something like that, is kind of like suicidal, because it's possible to play or check to king on the flop. It's possible they made an ace. It's going to be, if you're betting an ace here, you're going to kind of get owned. So betting, for the most part, a range of king or nothing. And by the way, the rest of the players in these hands are all high 6 professionals, so they all know this. When take chip bets the turn, they're like, okay, king or nothing. And maybe a bow, but probably not. So they're thinking, when Probus calls this, he's thinking, okay, take chip has a 1 pair hand, which is, take chip has 3 of a kind or a bluff. On the river's a complete brick, and take chip bets fairly large again. And Probus decides to go all in, and they're about 100 big blinds to start the hand with ace jack. So Probus made, and again, take chip has trips here, but that's sort of irrelevant. It's more interesting to focus on Probus' play. So Probus has ace jack in this hand, and what he's doing here is turning his hand into a bluff. It's certainly not a value bet. It's definitely not a value bet into a range of trips or nothing, because you're going to get a lot of folds and you're going to get a lot of unhappy results when called. So what he's doing here is turning his hand into a bluff and shoving the river. You might ask yourself, well, why is he doing this? The reason is to try to get take chip to fold a king. I think that the way that Probus looks at this is that he thinks that, well, I would probably check aces on this flop. I might check king 9, I might check 9s, I might check ace king, but he's almost certainly going to check at least aces. So it's certainly plausible that he has, the nuts here. It's certainly plausible that a hand like, king queen is only as good as a hand like king deuce, right? It's just a bluff catcher. because essentially what Probus is doing by raising this river is, he's sort of saying, in a sense, that he has aces. Let's just say he has aces. So like if you expect to win this by calling, you can only beat a bluff. So essentially what he's doing is turning his hand into a bluff, showing all in, trying to get take chip off of a king. Little does he know take chip's never folding in king, so I don't really like this bluff from a practical standpoint, but in theory it does make sense. All right, next hand is with an old school legend, your boy Roy J. I have been playing high stakes 6-max on PokerStars and Full Tilt with Roy J since at least 2010, maybe even 2009. He plays really slow, he plays really tight, and he only plays high stakes, and he bump hunts super hard. And as far as I know, no one in the community's ever met him. But Roy J, if you're out there, I'm here for you, dog. Find me on Twitter. I would love to catch up with you, Ryan D. Boker. All right, so Roy J opens the button. Iceman 3 bets a small blind. Now, by the way, the other thing is I'm going to assume that Iceman has no idea who Roy J is because I haven't seen him in the streets in a while, and he doesn't play much poker. So Iceman probably just thinks this is a fish, and honestly, he probably is just going to lose in this lineup. So sorry, Roy J. Anyway, so Iceman 3 bets, Roy J calls. Flop is 8-3-3 with a flush draw. Iceman bets, Roy J calls. So far, nothing unusual about this hand. Turn 2 of hearts, check, check. River, 7 of spades. Iceman bets big and gets basically min raise shoved on. And calls with aces. Now, in 95% of situations or instances, have to call in the river with aces. It's not even a question. You have aces with the ace of hearts. You basically lose to a bluff or a weak flush to check back. And you just, you can't be folding aces like you're some kind of tourist. You gotta call sometimes, you gotta call with the right hands. Aces seems like the right hand, you gotta call now. But, Roy J is the most legendary nit. And, so what's the price he's getting? So he has to call on this river $28.50 to win a total pot of 16,000. We'll do the math. 16,780, okay? He only needs to be good here 17% of the time. 17%, okay? Here's the problem. Roy J is never bluffing, is literally never bluffing. So even though you only need to be good 70% of the time, if you're good 0% of the time, and by the way, I would say you have a bad hand to call this river with versus Roy J because the hand he might bluff is a dry ace of hearts. You're not making money here, dude. You're just giving a bum hunter an extra $2,800. That's $2,800 you could spend on anything else. You could spend it on YouTube ads to prevent bum hunting. Instead of giving it to the bum hunters, you could promote not bum hunting, and you just lit this money on fire. You just punted it away. I'm sorry, Iceman. I respect you, but it's a terrible call. All right. Hand number, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hand number 6. Iceman, your boy Iceman, back in the mix. Raises on the button. Proto. Both high stakes 6-max right. PokerStars. 3 bets a small blind. Iceman comes in for the 4-bet Proto calls. So definitely a spot where ranges are going to be loose. You're going to be raising a lot of hands on the button. You're going to re-steal a lot of hands from the small blind, and you're going to re-steal a lot of hands from the button yet again. All right. Flop is Jack 7-3 with a flush draw. Decent-ish flop for Proto. He'll have a couple hands that'll make a piece of this, but he's not super excited about this board for sure. He will mostly miss this board and be behind hands like Ace King and Queen's Plus and stuff like that. So Iceman goes for a very small flop bet, betting actually slightly less than 1/3 pot. 4-bet pot. Stack ratio is very, very low. It's about 2. It's actually less than 2. A small bet here I think is fine. Turn 6 of clubs, so a bunch of nothing for everybody. Check, check. And the river's a jack. And what's interesting about this is that it's sort of a tough spot for both players. So it's a tough spot for Proto because Proto will likely have a flush draw or a hand like 10-9 of spades, 8-9 of spades that is likely going to call for 3-bet preflop, call the 4-bet, and then check call the flop. So he has some very obvious bluffs. On the other hand, he's also going to have some very obvious value bets. All of his jacks, which will have a number up. If you see his result here, he has as wide as Jack 9 suited. So he can have a ton of jacks for sure. On the other hand, it comes down to how much does Proto really bluff with those hands. Does he ever give up? Does he check the nut flush draw? Does he bet with the king high flush draw and worse? Like, what does he really do to determine, like how Iceman should play? Iceman has black aces, so he doesn't have a heart. He doesn't block the flush draw at all. It's possible that Proto has that type of hand. So I would say his call here on the river is sort of mandatory. In fact, the only thing I think is interesting about this hand is Proto's 3-bet and call of 4-bet with Jack-9 suited pre-flop. I would probably play it the same, but other than that, this hand looks pretty standard to me. Nice hand by both players. All right, hand number 7, I hope. Hand number 7, we got 40-7 versus your boy, fan of the Twitch stream guest favorite, Jungle Man, aka Wookiees. Playing a little heads up no limit, one of his specialties. He calls a raise, Jungle calls a raise in the big blind, and 40-7 bets 3/4 pot on the flop, 3/4 pot on the turn, and the cash almost triple pot on the river. So the board is 9-7-3-10 king. Okay, so why is 40-7 going all in on the river? It's a really big bet size to use, and we'll sort of ignore his hand for now, for the time being. The reason he's doing this is because Jungle Man can't ever have the nuts, or rather, Jungle Man, what hands he might value bet with, like in this instance, pocket nines, but we could also have 8-6, Jack 8. Essentially what he's thinking, or what he's saying by this bet size is that Jungle Man can never have a better hand than a hand like pocket nines on this river, so I'm just going to go all in and put his hand like a 10, like a 9, a king, whatever, 2-pair into a tough spot, and I'm going to try to sort of max out in value on this hand. Which I think is fine, and I think he's probably right. Like, I don't think Jungle really ever has, maybe he has Queen Jack, but probably not. He can, maybe have the straight, but again, he might check raise the turn. Jungle loves being real jungly on the flop and turn, so he might not ever have those hands. So he might only have showdown value here, and I would say that his hand like pocket nines beats all the showdown value, so I think an all-in bet size is fine. And I think Jungle with 2-pair has nothing he can do but hero call and lose $8,032.08. He would be getting way too owned in a very theoretical sense if he were to fold this hand. So good job, Jungle. Although Lord knows we knew you weren't folding this. You might just find the call with the 8-7 ski, so nothing too surprising. Jungle calls 3x pot bet with 2-pair. All right. I believe this is the last no limit hand. This might be the last no limit hand. Maybe one more. Hand number 8. MMA Sherdog versus Timothy, 2 players who play the high stakes 6-max game on Stars, but I don't believe play that much heads up. But I could be wrong. No, definitely not wrong. I was to say, I would know who's playing high stakes heads up on Stars. Anyway, so MMA Sherdog, or Asherdog, let's call him Sherdog. Call him Sherdog, why not? Sherdog raises up on the button, 2.5x. Timothy calls the big blind, seems good. King 10-2, 2 diamonds. Sherdog goes for a 3rd pot bet on the flop. Not my cup of tea, but I see sort of the merits to it. I think it's a fine play. And then goes 3/4, calls a check raise on the turn, and then gets shoved on the river and calls down. Now Timothy has 10-8 for a full house. Sherdog, what's interesting about this hand, has 2-8 for a Canadian full house, which not quite as powerful as the American counterpart. So why is he calling with a hand as bad as 2-8? Well, pre-flop he has nothing to do. He can't do anything but raise his hand. He has a suited hand on the button and heads up no limit. You got to play it. On the flop he has bottom pair and chooses to bet 1/3 pot. Not my cup of tea. Not a horrible play. Actually, a fine play. Turns 2-pair, and now he can be very comfortable to value bet against a flush, a straight draw, flush draw, straight draw, a 10 or king, right? He almost has the nuts, in heads up turn. He's a very strong hand on this board. So he bets and gets check raised, and then calls the check raise, and the river is the 10 and calls a shove. So the reason why, I guess the answer is the question rather is why would he do something like this? And he's doing this because he's paying close attention to the hands that Timothy is bluffing with. Value betting with. So if Timothy check raises the turn, MMA Sherdog, or your boy Sherdog, is thinking he has for value King 10, maybe 10-8, 2s, 8s, King 8. Okay? On the river, Sherdog has King 10, 10-8, 10-2, 10-2 on the turn, and 2s. And so, half half of those hands are, almost all those hands have an 8 or 2 in them. So by having an 8 and 2 in his hand, he's making it less likely that he has one of those hands. More likely he has a hand like Jack 7, 9 7, Jack 9, Queen 9. Maybe a bad diamond draw, all those things that he might bluff with. Well, so he doesn't have any of the cards that make it less likely that he's value betting, or bluffing, but he does have 2 cards that are 2 of the best cards to make it less likely he's value betting. The other thing that's interesting about this river is that he doesn't really have to worry about, getting owned by a hand like King 8 or King 2 or 8 9. I don't think Timothy would ever, other than 8 9, but probably not. I don't think Timothy would river Jack 8. I don't really think he would ever play them like that. I think he'd probably check the river or just not check raise the turn. I think he's probably more polarized to a straight or flush draw on the turn and a boat or straight draw on the river. And when, again, if you have a boat or straight draw on the river, it's like, in some ways, a hand like 8 deuce is a better hand to call down with than a hand like pocket aces, even though it's a stronger hand. So, whether or not it's a good call is hard to say, but I see and I appreciate the logic. So all in all, I would say, nice hand from Sure Dog. And Timothy. Timothy also played his hand well, I think. Oh wait, one more no limit hand. And this one is also puzzling. It's funny, the sort of the question is the river check. I mean, there are just some Baron hands that I just don't understand. A lot of them I think are really good, and then some of them I just don't get. So Baron opens from under the gun, gets through it on the button, and then calls pre-flop with 4-5 suited. I believe it's an anti-game. So yeah, I think his pre-flop. There was a question of well, wasn't this too loose pre-flop? I would say no. He's going to be calling 5-5-5 to win 1870. Less than 30% equity, 5-4 suited. I've said this several times, but suited connectors in general realize more equity at every stack depth than you would anticipate them realizing. So I would say this is I would play the same pre-flop. Great flop for him. He flops a backdoor flush draw and an 8-out straight draw. It's very good flop for his hand. It's a little bit. The only thing that's tough about this hand is that there's an ace on the flop, and generally that's going to favor the pre-flop 3 better. Because check on the flop and he gets a free look at the turn. The turn is a 10 of clubs. So now Baron's like, oh baby, Mirage and the strip, let's go. And he bets basically pot. He sometimes bets slightly over. We'll just say this is a pot-sized bet. He bets pot, and essentially what he's doing here is representing that he maybe has a hand like ace queen, but probably just really has 2 pair plus or a bluff, and is trying to put a hand like ace 4, and even really ace jack or ace queen or pocket queens into a tough situation. Because, essentially his range is a hand like 5-4, or a hand like Queen Jack or King Jack, or, a very good hand. Could have 9-8, could have a set, could have ace 10. Many good hands there for him. So he bets the turn, really just as a bluff, with a polarized range, I think is fine. The river gives him the club, and he's like, oh yeah, that's the river that I was dreaming. Maybe not the perfect river, but we're going to take the 9 of clubs ski. And he goes for a check. And this is a little bit puzzling to me, just because I thought he would think that the majority of Fish's range is likely to be showdown value and probably not all that many bluffs. So, in other words, in a situation where Fish will not often be betting the river, it's unusual for you to check raise a strong hand because he's not often going to bet. He's often going to check down his hand like ace 5 or pocket kings. But maybe he has a different read, and maybe he thinks that Fish will will oftentimes turn bluffs into in on this river, or maybe for some reason he thinks, he'll oftentimes have an 8 or a flush himself, and he's checking because he wants to check his whole range here. I don't know. But I do know the river check is funky, and I don't quite get that. Fish bets about half pot with his set of aces that he checked back on the flop, which I think 3 betting pre-flop, mandatory, check flop, could go either way, but it's fine. Call turn, definitely. And then, I would bet the river as well. And then once I got check min raised, I would probably, it's hard to fold, again, just given pot odds, but I might just have to find a fold. I don't have the ace of clubs, and presumably I'm going to have a flush or even a straight here that I would call with instead. And yeah, it almost seems tough for the bluffs. But I can't completely fault the call. Again, top set with a great price, and you only lose a really weird hand, so... but I think Baron might just be the king of having weird hands and it's a value bet. It's wait, what were you? How do you what? But he has it. Anyway, that's what I think is going on here. Hang on, give me 1 minute. Almost done. All right. All right, over to the PLO. My favorite. We have a three-handed hand between Lot Nice and TJ Bentham. So Lotte, Lot Nice, pots the button. TJ calls the big blind. Ace 9 7, 2 hearts, 1 diamond. Check on the flop. TJ pots the turn. The turn's an 8, bringing, now there's 6 5, 10 6, and Jack 10 all make a straight. Pots the flop. Pots the turn. Lot Nice pots into him. TJ calls. And the river's a brick, it's queen. And TJ checks, and Lot Nice bets pot again, and TJ calls. And Lot Nice shows down, he checks back with King Jack 4, 2 hearts, 2 diamonds, so he's going to be able to continue on almost every turn card. And TJ had the 10 to 6 straight, so the second nut straight. And it's a weird spot just because I don't think Lot Nice is checking a ton of Jack 10s on this flop, and I think he might overbluff. The other thing is when TJ pots this turn, he could also have Jack 10 or just like a lot of strong hands. So I think, and then especially on the river when Lot Nice goes for this big bet, he got called by the second nut straight, and it's just because you have 2 jacks, there's still 2 jacks left in the deck. I don't think that TJ has a ton of hands that really fold either street after the turn pot. Like TJ recognizes that this is a tough, this is sort of a tough board for him, this is a tough spot for him. He's got the big blind range. The big blind range PLO is typically pretty weak. This is like a connected, sort of middle plus high connected board. A lot of good hands here for Lot Nice. So I just think I think Lot Nice probably just isn't making this a profitable bluff. If he did, I think you need to use a smaller bet size, or perhaps take a different line. So I slightly don't like Lot Nice's play, and TJ's play, got him. Got him. And I think there's nothing wrong with TJ's play. I think bet the turn is good. And then really, I guess you just have to call down because I think you are at a threat for 2 jacks to try to bluff you off your hand. You just got to call down the second nut straight and just live with the results. All right. And the last hand versus Abron, 0621. I've actually met him in person, just like a Chinese dude who likes to play poker. And Side Saddle 86, your boy Side Saddle 86, somebody I've never seen play a hand of high stakes poker or any poker. He's in there for the 2-4 heads up PLO. I feel like I had to get him in there at the for the last hand of the September high stakes start. So Abron pops the button, Side Saddle repots. Abron called. Okay. Look a little bit deeper than 100 big blinds. It's a little bit weirder, I think, for the big blind at this stack depth, but not a huge difference from 100 bigs. Oh, actually, you know what? The ante, it's about 100 bigs. Queen, 8, 2, rainbow, check on the flop. Turn is the 4 of diamonds, and side saddle goes for a turn bet, looks like 2/3 pot. Aaron calls, and the river's a 3, and Aaron goes for, so it's like a 2/3 bet. Now, let's start with side saddles. Your boy Side Saddle 86, Ace, King, 6, nut flush draw. So I actually would probably bet this on the flop. I think this is you're not oftentimes going to see bets from your opponent on this board, and I think you're comfortable getting it in. On this flop, I think it's going to be tough for you to be beat. And I think that, by checking, you're just going to let Aaron realize some equity. That said, if I did go check on the flop, turning the nut flush draw, I think it's a reasonable spot to bet. On the river's a 3 of clubs, and side saddle goes for a check, which I definitely think is the right play. I think it's unlikely that Aaron's going to call very many hands, and based on pre-flop, Aaron's going to improve far more often than side saddle is on that river. So I definitely don't think a bet with really almost any hand makes sense. I think a check with all hands, especially a hand like aces, is a good play. And then Aaron bets and he check calls, and that's interesting, but I like it because the hands which are probably most threatening to you are hands like 5-6 or Ace-5, and when you have 2 aces and a 6 in your hand, you make it less likely. And there's certainly a number of 8-7-6 plus diamonds, 8 plus diamonds, like 10-9, 7-6 type, type hands that Aaron could have that you could beat. So I think I like a call. When I look at Aaron's hand, he checked the flop with a gut shot, a backdoor flush draw, and a backdoor straight draw. I think that's good. I don't think this hand makes a ton of sense as a flop bet. On the turn, he turned the flush draw and a double gutter. Gotta call the turn versus the bet. And on the river, he has literally no pair and some removal, and it's good cards for him. I like his bet. So slide saddle, I don't know. Like, he was just doing stuff and it worked out. I think on the flop, and I think made a tough but good river call. And Aaron, I thought, honestly played the hand well. I would play it literally the exact same on every street. So yeah. Anyway, this has been This Week in the High Stakes Thread on 2+2. I'm your host, Ryan Fee. If you guys would like to send me hands to review, if there's hands in the High Stakes Thread that you find are interesting and you want me to review them, send them to me on wherever you want, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, or Facebook. I am Ryan P. Poker everywhere. And thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you did, you can subscribe to our Upswing Poker YouTube channel by clicking right here. If you want to find more videos of me, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel right here. And if you want to ask us a question or follow us on social media, click right down here and you'll be taken to our social media page at upswingpoker.com.